My mother's handwriting used to look like the morning. Open, steady, rounded letters that unfolded like light across a kitchen table. That's how I remember her. Evelyn, my mother. 79 and still standing at the sink every morning the way she always had, humming something old from the church choir and patting the counter with a folded dish towel as if she were smoothing the day flat. But that morning, something in the room didn't sit right. The sun came in, same way it always does, turning the dust into tiny gold planets. The kettle hissed. The radio mumbled a weather report about rain that never came. And still, different. It wasn't a thunderclap moment. It was smaller than that, a loose thread you notice on your sweater and can't ignore. "Tea?" she asked, holding my coffee mug. "Coffee, Mom," I said gently. "Oh. Right," she said, smiling, the kind of smile people use to apologize without words. She set the mug down and turned to the pantry. I watched her reach for nothing, hesitate, reach again. The motions were there, but the certainty had slipped an inch to the left. Somewhere in those seconds, my stomach went cold. I told myself not to make a fuss. We all forget. We all misplace. I forget where I put my keys twice a week. But there was a look in her eyes, just for a second, like a light flickered, dimmed, and came back. I'd never seen that on her face, not once. She poured hot water into the mug, tapped a tea bag against the rim, and set it in front of me like she'd solved something. "Mom," I said softly, "remember? Coffee." She stared at the mug, and the smile trembled. "Of course," she murmured, sliding it away. My head's like a crowded attic today. We both laughed because laughing keeps the dam from breaking. Later, she asked me to check the mail. It was Sunday. I told her that. "Oh," she said. "No wonder it felt quiet out there. None of this on its own is a tragedy. It's life. It's noise." But the tiny things kept coming. A name at the tip of her tongue that wouldn't land. A story she started twice. A pot left simmering longer than it should have. Every odd moment had its ordinary excuse. She was tired, she'd skipped breakfast, she was thinking about the neighbor's dog that had gone missing. I clung to the explanations because explanations are soft pillows, and I needed something to rest my fear on. The first time she called my daughter Lily, the little one, I didn't flinch. Lily didn't either. She just hugged Nana's waist, pressed her cheek into the apron like she was listening for heartbeat. "I'm Lily," she said, sweet as sugar. "I know," Mom said, tapping Lily's nose. "Don't you think I know?" We let it go. We let so much go. And yet, sometime around lunch, the day turned. I was slicing apples. She was setting out plates. We were talking about a pie recipe that lived in her memory the way hymns do. By heart, by hand. "Cinnamon first," she said. "No," I teased. "You always do butter first." She laughed and put a plate down. And another, and another. I looked up and there were 7 plates on the table. We were 3 people. "Expecting company?" I tried to make it light. "Oh," she said, her voice thin. "I thought..." Then she looked down as if the plates had taken root there on their own. I don't know what I thought. There it was. The thing I'd been skirting around. Not a single missed detail but a drift, a fog that seemed to lift and settle on its own schedule. She blinked at the plates like she'd wandered into a scene mid-sentence and wasn't sure where to stand. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice warm. "It's okay. Happens to me all the time. Let's put a few away." She reached for a plate and stopped. Her fingers hovered in the air, uncertain. That's what undid me. Fingers that had buttoned winter coats, braided my hair, folded church bulletins, taught me how to tie a rope, now questioning a plate. I took her hand. It felt like her hand, familiar as breath. But her skin was cooler than usual. "Let's eat," I said. "We're fine." She nodded. She swallowed. "I'm just tired," she whispered. I didn't sleep. After lunch, she went to the den to rest. She's always loved that room. The window overlooking the maple, the shelf of paperbacks with cracked spines, the photo of Dad in his service uniform. I followed her, stood in the door. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands on her knees, like a child waiting for instructions. "Do you want a blanket?" I asked. She looked at the pile of knitted throws like they were strangers. "Which one is mine?" she said. All of them were hers. She'd made them. Something inside me buckled. I didn't cry, not then. I went to the hallway and leaned into the wall like it could hold me up and carry me back a few months. Back to the version of her who sang while she dusted, who could close her eyes and tell you every neighbor's birthday, who kept a recipe card for a cake she'd memorized 40 years ago because writing it down felt like honoring it. Back to the morning I kept thinking I could recover if I just pushed hard enough. Have you ever stood at the edge of a change and begged the world to rewind a couple of inches? Have you ever felt the air go thin in a perfectly normal room? That night, she asked what time she needed to leave for school. She hasn't taught in 20 years. The word school sat in the living room like smoke. Lily looked at me. I looked at the clock. My mother looked at the door, shoulders squared, waiting for some bell to ring. "Mom," I said, "you're home." She looked down at her hands. "I know," she said, almost embarrassed. "Isn't that silly? I was thinking about the third graders and, well, it's silly." We sat together. I told her about Lily's science project. We talked about the neighbor's roses. We were fine, we were fine, we were fine, until she asked me to remind her what month it was. I told her. She nodded too many times, as though she'd nodded herself into agreement with a world that kept moving no matter what we remembered. Around bedtime, when the house goes gentle and the daytime insistence quiets, I found her in the bathroom staring at her own toothbrush. "I can't recall where this goes," she said, voice small. "I'm sure I knew earlier." I pointed to the ceramic cup we'd used for 40 years. I'd made the cup in a summer ceramics class when I was 13. It's crooked and the glaze is uneven, and she's always called it charming. She set the toothbrush in the cup as if placing a candle on an altar. Then she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since I was a child, and she was the one memorizing me. "Thank you," she said, and I heard it land in the room like a heavy coin. What do you do with a day like that? You make tea you don't drink. You gather plates you don't need. You fold throws you don't remember covering anyone with. You pretend the house is the same. You pretend you're the same. You hold your mother's hand and try to memorize every ridge and seam like your palm could be a map back to yesterday. When I finally lay down, I stared into the dark and bargained with it. Maybe it's a vitamin thing. Maybe it's her blood sugar. Maybe it's grief turned into some kind of fog. Maybe it's the new medication for her knees. Maybe. I stacked maybes like sandbags against a river. The truth? I could feel it moving under everything, soft but sure. I didn't speak it. Not yet. Names have power. I wasn't ready to give this a name. At 2 a.m., I heard the soft shuffle of her slippers. I went to the hallway and found her there, wrapped in the green throw with the dropped stitch at one corner. She was looking at the front door like it was a puzzle. "I was on my way to the kitchen," she said. "The house changed." "It does that at night," I said. "The house likes to play tricks." She smiled. "I suppose it does." We stood there, two grown women in our socks, listening to the refrigerator hum and the old pipes talk. I led her to the kitchen. We poured a glass of water. We listened to crickets press themselves against the window screens. She told me a story about a summer when her sister and she took lemons from their neighbor's tree and made lemonade that was too tart to drink. She laughed at that memory, her laugh lifting like a kite. Then it slipped. "What was her name?" she asked, eyebrows knitting. "My sister's. I know it, it's right here." She touched her temple, as if the name hid just beneath the skin. I said it for her. She repeated it slowly, trying it on. "Of course," she said, laughing again, a little too loud. "How could I forget that?" We walked back down the hall. She paused in front of the photos. Birthdays, weddings, Christmases, ordinary Tuesdays. She trailed her finger along the frames and named who she could. She skipped over one picture entirely, as if leaving a space where a name should be might coax it to float up later. When she reached the photo of my father, her hand stopped. She pressed her palm against the glass. "Good night," she said to him, soft as a secret. In bed, I listened to her door click. I told the ceiling, "We'll get this right in the morning. We'll make lists. We'll call the doctor. We'll walk and breathe and cook and pray. We'll keep the world steady." I said it like a promise and a prayer. I said it because saying things makes them feel possible. And then another thought, smaller but sharper. What if this is the first sign? What if the thread we noticed today is tied to something bigger? Something I can't unknot with coffee and reassurance. I lay there, counting my mother's breaths through the wall, and asked the question I'd been avoiding, the one that echoes in kitchens and vans and hospital parking lots across this country. Have you ever watched someone you love slowly forget who you are? If you have, you know that somewhere between the tea and the toothbrush, everything feels different. Not ruined, not yet, just different, in a way you can't unsee. That was the day the ground shifted a hair, the day the light came in at a new angle, the day I began to pay attention to every small thing and call it by its weight. The day Evelyn, my mother, my steady place, seemed to be standing on a shoreline I couldn't quite reach, and I told myself, out loud in the dark, like an oath, I will find a way to meet her there. I used to think that forgetting was like misplacing a single memory, a misplaced key, a recipe lost between cookbooks. But I was wrong. Forgetting is not a single event. It's erosion. It happens in quiet, steady drifts, like waves reshaping the shore one grain at a time. You don't notice at first. Then one day the coastline is different. It started with names, not just people's names, but the names of things. Chair, oven mitt, remote. "Can you hand me the thing?" she'd say, gesturing with her hands, the air full of invisible nouns. Sometimes she'd laugh it off. Other times she'd grow still, eyes clouding, searching a space only she could see. When the word finally came, she'd say it with relief, as if rescuing something precious from a burning house. There were good days, clear days. Days when she'd tell Lily stories about growing up in Wisconsin, about the summers that smelled like lilacs and gasoline. Days when she'd hum "You Are My Sunshine" while folding towels and the house felt whole again. But even on those days I'd catch it. The flicker. A pause too long. A sentence that drifted off mid-air. It wasn't absence exactly. It was more like static. She began repeating stories. At first it was charming. "Remember the time your father got stuck on the roof?" she'd say, laughing. The first few times we laughed too. But by the fifth telling, her laugh felt thinner, like a recording losing fidelity. Once I said softly, "You already told me that, Mom." She blinked, looked hurt for a moment, then smiled. "Well," she said, "it's worth telling again, isn't it?" I stopped correcting her after that. What good does it do to remind someone they're forgetting? It only deepens the hollow. The changes crept into daily routines. She'd forget the laundry in the washer, then rewash it 3 times until it smelled like nothing. She'd leave the milk out overnight. She'd put the TV remote in the freezer. Once, she put her purse in the oven. "I thought it was the bread," she said, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. We began labeling things, sticky notes everywhere, drawer, toaster, bathroom, bedroom, a house of reminders. But the more we labeled, the more surreal it felt, like living in a museum exhibit called Evelyn's Life. One morning she tore the notes down. "It makes me feel stupid," she said, her hands trembling, "like I'm a child." I told her they were for me, not for her. But she knew. She always knew. The hardest part wasn't the forgetting. It was the awareness of forgetting. She could feel her mind slipping, and it terrified her. "I'm fading," she whispered once, her voice breaking. "It's like I'm disappearing from the inside out." I didn't know what to say. I just held her hand. Sometimes love is just holding on while someone you love unravels. At night, I'd sit in my car in the driveway before going inside, breathing in the silence. I'd scroll through my phone, reading articles. Early signs of dementia. Foods that boost memory. How to talk to a parent with Alzheimer's. Every headline was a knife dressed as hope. Every paragraph a mix of science and heartbreak. Doctor's appointments became routine. Blood tests, cognitive tests, the little drawings, the memory lists. Repeat these 3 words: apple, penny, table. She'd smile at the nurse. Apple, penny, table. 2 minutes later, the nurse would ask her to repeat them. Apple, what was the other one? Penny, I'd whisper. No helping, the nurse said. I bit my lip. The nurse smiled kindly, but I could feel something inside me cracking. When we left the clinic, she said, I think I did pretty well. I nodded. You did great, Mom. She believed me. I wanted to believe me too. The house began to shrink around us. Every object turned into a test. Every conversation, a fragile thing you had to hold with both hands. Sometimes she'd ask where my father was, as if he were still alive. He's gone, Mom. I'd remind her softly. She'd frown. Gone where? To heaven. She'd nod, but the question would return again the next morning, like a bird that forgot it had already landed. There was a morning, I can still feel the exact air of it, when she got lost walking around the block. Just one block. She'd done it every day for 30 years. A neighbor found her 2 streets away, standing by a stop sign, tears on her face. I knew I was close, she said when I arrived, but I didn't know which way home was. I wrapped her in my arms. Her body shook like she'd been out in the cold for hours. That night she apologized. I scared you, she said. You're okay, I whispered. That's all that matters. But she shook her head. No, that's not all that matters. I don't want to be a burden. The word burden stayed with me like a bruise, because she wasn't one. She was my mother, the woman who'd stayed up sewing Halloween costumes, who taught me to drive, who cried at every graduation and wedding. And now, every time she said, I don't want to be a burden, I heard the echo. I know I'm slipping. I can see it too. She began to withdraw from people. Church friends stopped by, but she'd sit quietly, smiling politely, lost in their stories. She seems different, they'd say after. She's just tired, I'd reply. Tired. My go-to word for everything I didn't want to name. Some evenings she'd just sit by the window, watching the streetlights come on. What are you thinking about, Mom? I'd ask. She'd shrug. I'm trying to remember something. Something good? I think so, she said, but it keeps running away. Her words haunted me. It keeps running away, because that's exactly how it felt. Memories darting like wild birds, just out of reach. Lily started drawing pictures for her. So Nana won't forget me. One afternoon she handed my mother a crayon drawing of the 2 of them holding hands under a yellow sun. Evelyn studied it for a long time. Then she said, That's beautiful. Who is that little girl? I felt the room tilt. Lily smiled bravely and said, It's me, Nana. Evelyn blinked, smiled back, and said, Of course it is. Then she hung the drawing on the fridge, right next to a grocery list she'd written 6 times that week. It wasn't just her memory that was fading. It was her confidence, her spark, herself. She stopped wearing her favorite earrings. She stopped baking. She stopped telling stories because she was afraid of getting them wrong. She once said, I don't know who I'm supposed to be anymore. And that's when it hit me. It wasn't just my mother who was disappearing. It was the version of our family that existed when she was whole. Every forgotten word pulled a thread from all of us. That night, after tucking her in, I stood by her bedroom door and listened to her whisper to the dark. Please don't let me forget my children. I pressed my forehead to the door and whispered back, We won't let you, Mom. We won't. But deep down, I knew that memory isn't something you can hold for someone else. All you can do is stand close enough so that when the world begins to blur, they can still feel you there. There's a point in every long night when silence stops feeling peaceful and starts feeling heavy. That's where we were living, in that kind of silence. The kind that hums just under the skin, whispering that something sacred is slipping away. At first, I thought I could fix it. That's what daughters do, right? Fix things. I made lists, calendars, reminders, medication charts. I read articles about coconut oil, brain games, crossword puzzles, turmeric tea. I downloaded memory apps and printed exercises from the Alzheimer's Association website. Every morning I'd bring her tea and say, "Let's do our word puzzles, Mom." And she'd smile, obedient and polite, like a student trying to please her teacher. But some days she'd push the book away and say, "I don't know those words anymore." And then she'd look at me, really look, like she was searching my face for the answer she'd already lost. There was one morning when I found her standing in the backyard, barefoot in the dew, wearing her nightgown and Dad's old cardigan. "Mom, what are you doing out here?" She turned slowly, eyes soft and confused. "I was looking for him," she said. "For Dad?" She nodded. "He said he'd be right back." My throat closed. Dad's been gone for 15 years. I led her inside, wiping her cold feet with a towel. She looked at me embarrassed. "I guess I dreamed it," she said. "It's okay," I whispered. "Dreams can feel real." She shook her head. It felt too real. That night I cried in the laundry room, the one place she never went anymore. I pressed my face into the pile of clean clothes, breathed in detergent and the ghost of her lavender perfume, and asked the question I'd been too afraid to say out loud. "How do you care for someone who's vanishing in slow motion?" The doctors started using words I hated. Progression, cognitive decline, stage 2. They said it gently, with the kind of practiced compassion that only makes it worse. They told me to prepare, to simplify her life, to accept that she'd need more supervision. Supervision, as if she were a child. But she wasn't. She was my mother. The woman who once stood by my bed all night when I had pneumonia. The woman who knew every verse of every lullaby, who ran our house like a small, warm universe. Now I was the one reminding her to eat, to shower, to lock the door. The roles had reversed so completely that some days I couldn't breathe under the weight of it. One afternoon, she forgot how to turn on the stove. She stood there staring at the knobs, hand hovering like she was afraid they'd burn her. When I came in and turned it for her, she jumped. "I used to do this with my eyes closed," she said softly. I didn't know how to respond, so I just said, "I know, Mom." Her shoulders dropped. "I hate this," she whispered. "I hate this so much." It was the first time she said it out loud. "I hate this." And that broke something in me. Because until then, I'd been pretending it wasn't as bad as it was, pretending we could manage if I just tried harder. But that night, when I found her crying quietly in the bathroom because she couldn't remember how to brush her teeth, I stopped pretending. I sat on the floor next to her. The tiles were cold. Her toothbrush was still dry in her hand. She looked up at me with those same eyes that once told me everything would be okay. Scraped knees, bad grades, broken hearts. Now they were pleading for the same thing. "I don't want to be this way," she said. "Please, I don't want to lose myself." I didn't have an answer. I just pulled her into my arms. We stayed there a long time, mother and daughter, the air between us thick with everything we couldn't say. That night, after I tucked her into bed, she asked, "Do you think God knows what's happening to me?" "Yes, Mom," I said. "He does." She nodded slowly. "Then maybe he can help me remember who I am." She fell asleep with that prayer on her lips. I stayed up in the hallway listening to the clock tick and the pipe sigh, and I realized something cruel and tender all at once. Love doesn't stop the forgetting. It just gives you a reason to keep showing up. The exhaustion crept in quietly, the same way her forgetting did. I'd wake up tired, go to bed more tired, and still find no rest in between. Friends called less. Work became a blur. Every conversation circled back to Mom. The latest doctor, the newest supplement, the endless hope wrapped in clinical words. Some nights I'd stand in the kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at the refrigerator light like it could show me the future. I'd whisper, "How long do we have?" But the hum of the fridge never answered. One evening, after a particularly hard day, she'd mistaken the bathroom for the closet, spilled tea on the carpet, and called me by her sister's name. I lost it. I raised my voice. "Mom, please, you can't do this alone anymore. You need help." She froze. Tears filled her eyes. "I thought I had help," she said quietly. The silence that followed was sharper than any argument. I wanted to take the words back, but they hung there, heavy and unforgiving. She turned away from me and whispered, "Maybe I should just go somewhere they can take care of me." The phrase sliced through me. I knelt beside her. "No," I said, shaking my head. "You're not going anywhere. We'll figure this out. Together." But she just stared at the wall, her eyes distant. That was the first time she didn't believe me. Later that night, she couldn't remember how to get into bed. She stood beside it, clutching the blanket like a lost child. I guided her down gently. She whispered, "Thank you, dear," and closed her eyes. I sat on the edge of her bed long after she fell asleep, watching her chest rise and fall. That's when I felt it, the quiet surrender that comes after fighting too long. The part of you that whispers, "Maybe this is the beginning of the end." I went to my room, turned off the light, and finally let myself cry the way I hadn't in months. Raw, breathless, ugly crying that comes from the center of your chest. Because that night I understood something no doctor had said aloud. This wasn't just her illness. It was our illness. It was reshaping both of us, carving away who we used to be. In the dark, I asked the question that had been forming quietly all along. What if this is the part where we start to lose her for good? And then another thought, quieter but persistent. Or what if, somewhere inside that fading light, there's still a way to bring her back? That fragile spark, that whisper of "what if," was the only thing that kept me from collapsing entirely. Because even at the bottom, some part of me still believed there had to be something out there. Something simple, something natural, something that might give her back a little piece of herself. I just didn't know what it was yet. But soon, we'd find it, in the most ordinary place imaginable. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday you barely remember. Gray sky, light rain, errands that never end. I'd left Mom at home with Lily and a list of things that felt both ordinary and impossible. Bread, milk, eggs, her favorite peach jam. I was so tired that day, moving through the aisles like a ghost, pushing a cart that squeaked every few steps. I remember stopping in front of the shelf of cooking oils, olive, coconut, sunflower, and staring blankly, trying to recall which one Mom used to buy before she started forgetting recipes. That's when I heard a voice behind me. "Excuse me," she said softly. "You're holding the last bottle of black sesame oil." I turned. It was a woman maybe in her 80s, small but steady, with clear blue eyes and a scarf wrapped around her hair. She smiled, not impatiently but knowingly. "Oh, sorry," I said, handing her the bottle. "Go ahead." She took it but didn't walk away. "Do you cook with this?" she asked, her voice gentle. I shook my head. "No, I was just looking." She tilted her head. "You have that look. The searching for something you can't name look. I know it well." I laughed softly. "I guess that's accurate." She studied me for a moment, the way someone does when they're trying to read a page you haven't written yet. "Someone you love isn't well," she said quietly. I froze. "How did you—" She smiled again. "I've been there. My husband. He had what they call the forgetting sickness. Alzheimer's. The words made my throat tighten. "My mother," I whispered. She nodded as if we were suddenly part of some silent, heartbreaking sisterhood. "Then listen," she said, her voice dropping to a hush. "Black sesame oil saved us." I almost laughed. "Saved you?" She held up the bottle, the label shining under the fluorescent lights. "I don't mean it cured him," she said quickly. "Nothing cures that. But it gave him back something. Clarity, calm, connection." He started remembering little things, our wedding song, the smell of our first house. He said his mind felt brighter. I blinked. "From sesame oil?" She nodded. "A teaspoon every morning. I read about it in a Japanese study. They found compounds in black sesame called sesamin and sesamol. They help protect the brain from oxidative stress, the kind that comes with aging. Natural antioxidants. The same kind the fancy pills try to imitate." Her voice was steady, matter of fact, not the kind of breathless promise you hear on TV. She wasn't selling me anything. She was just sharing. "I started taking it too," she said. "For my memory, for my heart, and maybe for the hope of it." Something in me softened, that mixture of skepticism and desperate curiosity that lives inside every caregiver. I looked at the bottle again. Small, simple, $10. Hope apparently was on aisle 6. "Did he get better?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "He didn't get worse as quickly. He started sleeping better, smiling more, remembering our children's names for longer. Sometimes that's enough, isn't it? Just a little more time." Her words hit me like a small prayer. Just a little more time. Before she walked away, she said, "Add it to her breakfast. Just a teaspoon. It won't hurt, and it might surprise you." Then she patted my hand and turned the corner, leaving me standing there in the hum of the aisle, clutching my own bottle of black sesame oil like it was some fragile secret. Back home, Mom was sitting in her armchair, staring out the window at the rain. Lily was coloring at her feet. "Hi, Mom," I said, forcing brightness into my voice. "I got your jam." She turned slowly, smiled. "Good," she said. "The one with the label I like?" "The exact one." Her smile widened a little. As I unpacked the groceries, my eyes kept landing on the bottle. It gleamed under the kitchen light, dark and golden at once, like something ancient. I remembered the woman's words. Just a teaspoon. It won't hurt. That night, I searched it online. There it was, study after study. Small trials from Japan, India, and Harvard Medical School. Sesamine and sesamol may protect brain cells from oxidative damage. Supports memory and focus in aging adults. I read every line, heart pounding like I'd found a door cracked open in a house I thought was sealed forever. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't even a promise. But it was something real. Something that made sense. So the next morning, I poured a teaspoon into a small glass and stirred it into her oatmeal. She wrinkled her nose. "What's this?" "Something new," I said. "It's supposed to be good for the heart and the brain." She smiled weakly. "Well, I could use both." I watched her eat, pretending to focus on my coffee, but every spoonful felt like a test. After breakfast, she sat by the window again. The light hit her hair just right. Silver and soft, almost luminous. And for a moment I saw it. The smallest flicker of recognition in her eyes. She looked out at the maple tree and said, "It's turning early this year." It was such an ordinary sentence. But she hadn't noticed the seasons in months. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Yeah," I said. "It is." That night I wrote in my notebook. Something I hadn't done since Dad passed. Day 1, Evelyn had her sesame oil. She noticed the tree. In the quiet of my room, I thought about that woman in the grocery store. How she'd appeared just when I was ready to give up. How she didn't promise miracles, only a chance at gentleness, at slowing the tide. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe faith, maybe both. All I knew was that for the first time in months I felt something stirring in me again, something that looked a lot like hope. For the first few days, I didn't expect much. Maybe that was the secret, not expecting anything at all. I mixed the black sesame oil into Mom's oatmeal each morning, just like that woman had said. A teaspoon. That's it. The smell was nutty, almost comforting, like something ancient and familiar. Mom never questioned it again after that first day. She'd just nod and eat slowly, the way you do when the world feels too fast. It was a quiet kind of hope, one you don't talk about, because talking about it might scare it away. On the 5th morning, I noticed the first shift. It was small, a flicker in the fog. Mom sat by the window as always, holding her tea, and said, "The birds are back early this year." I froze. She hadn't mentioned the birds since last summer. "Yes," I said, careful not to sound too excited. "They are." She smiled faintly, her eyes following the sky. "They used to wake me up at dawn. Your father hated it." She chuckled softly, a memory connected to another memory. That hadn't happened in months. I felt my throat tighten. I didn't say anything. I just let her talk. Over the next few weeks, small things began to happen, quiet miracles hiding inside ordinary days. She started humming again while washing the dishes. She asked about Lily's school project and remembered the topic the next day. She began calling the cat by its name again instead of the little one with fur. One afternoon, I found her sitting at the piano, untouched for years, her fingers hesitating over the keys. "Do you remember how to play?" I asked. She looked at me, eyes uncertain. Then she pressed one note, then another. It was shaky, off-key, but it was something. "Muscle memory," I whispered to myself, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. She played the first line of "You Are My Sunshine," and when Lily walked in, she clapped her hands and sang along. Mom laughed, really laughed, and said, "Oh my, I'm out of tune." The sound filled the house in a way I hadn't realized I'd missed. Around the 3rd week, she began sleeping through the night again. No more wandering at 2 a.m., no more confused whispers in the hallway. Her face looked softer in the mornings, her voice steadier. I called her doctor for a check-in. I didn't mention the oil right away. I just described the changes. "She's more alert," I said. "Her sleep's improved. Her mood too." The doctor paused. "That's wonderful," she said carefully. "Sometimes these things fluctuate." I could hear the caution in her tone, but I didn't mind. I wasn't looking for medical validation, I was living it. A week later, I caught her in the garden. The air smelled like earth and rosemary. She was kneeling by the flower bed, touching the soil. When she saw me, she smiled. "I thought these died," she said, pointing at the tulips. "But they came back." I looked at her, at the dirt under her fingernails, at the life in her voice. "They did," I said softly. "They came back. It wasn't lost on me. The metaphor blooming right there in front of us. Of course, there were still bad days. Days when she forgot where the bathroom was. Days when she called me by my aunt's name. But even then, something had shifted. The panic in her eyes wasn't as sharp. She seemed to recover faster, to find her way back from the fog a little more each time. Once, during one of those rough mornings, she looked at me and said, "I know I'm forgetting again, but it doesn't feel so dark anymore." I swallowed hard. "That's good, Mom. That's really good." She nodded. Maybe the darkness just got tired of me. We both laughed, but my eyes burned. Lily started noticing too. "Mom," she said one afternoon, "Nana's remembering things again." I smiled. "Yeah, she is." She remembered my teacher's name, and she asked about my hamster. "She did?" "Twice," Lily said proudly. That night, after putting Lily to bed, I sat by Mom's door and listened to her hum the same song she used to sing to me when I was little. It was cracked, uneven, but it was there, that quiet, steady rhythm of who she was. And I realized, maybe healing doesn't always look like recovery. Sometimes it looks like remembering one song, one name, One laugh, 1 teaspoon at a time. By the end of that first month, her eyes looked brighter. Even her movements seemed surer. Slower, yes, but with purpose. She began helping me fold the laundry again, something she'd stopped doing after forgetting how to match socks. "This one's yours," she'd say, holding up a shirt. "You always loved blue." She was right, I hadn't worn blue in weeks, but I'd once loved it. "You remembered," I said softly. She shrugged. "It just came to me." I wanted to ask how, but maybe some things don't need to be explained. That night I opened my notebook. Day 30, she remembered the birds, the song, the tulips, the color blue. Maybe small things aren't small at all. And under that, I wrote something I hadn't written in years. Hope is quiet, but it's still here. If you'd told me a year ago that a teaspoon of oil could change the rhythm of my mother's days, I would have smiled politely and kept scrolling. Because that's what we do when life has taught us to trust only what comes with a prescription label or a doctor's seal. But these last few weeks had taught me something different. Sometimes healing doesn't knock on the front door. Sometimes it whispers through ordinary things. I'm not a scientist. I'm a daughter who reads late at night with a highlighter and too much coffee. But I wanted to understand what was happening, even just a little. So I started digging into the language of neurons, antioxidants, and something the doctors called oxidative stress. It sounds complicated, but it's really just this. As we get older, our brains collect tiny bits of wear and tear like dust on a shelf. That dust comes from stress, pollution, poor sleep, processed food, all the invisible little thieves that steal energy from our cells. When I looked up sesamin and sesamol, the compounds in black sesame oil, the same words kept coming up: neuroprotective, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant. In plain English, it meant they help the brain fight back against the slow damage that aging leaves behind. I found a study from Harvard Medical School that said diets rich in antioxidants, like those in berries, nuts, and sesame, can reduce the buildup of harmful proteins linked to memory loss. Another paper from Kyoto University in Japan described how black sesame's natural lignans support healthy blood flow to the brain, improving oxygen delivery. And a report from the NIH explained how these same molecules may help preserve the brain's own energy source, something called NAD+, the spark plug of our cells. When I read that, something clicked. It wasn't magic, it was maintenance. Just like oil keeps a car's engine running smoothly, this simple food seemed to be keeping my mother's mind from grinding to a stop. I started to notice patterns. On the days she took her oil, her focus was steadier, her mood softer. She still forgot things, yes, but the fear that used to flood her eyes had gentled. It was as if her brain had found a quieter rhythm, a way to breathe again. I told her doctor about it during our next appointment. She listened, took notes, and said, "It's good that she's improving. There's growing evidence around natural compounds like these. Diet is powerful, never underestimate that." She didn't promise anything. She didn't dismiss it either. She just said, "Keep observing. Keep nourishing her." That word, nourish, stayed with me. It felt so different from treat or medicate. Nourishing meant feeding the parts of her that were still alive, still fighting. I read about other things too. Blueberries, tiny, ordinary berries, contain anthocyanins, another kind of brain-protective antioxidant. A Tufts University study showed that older adults who ate a cup a day performed better on memory tests after 12 weeks. Green tea, turmeric, dark chocolate, they all shared the same quiet secret. Nature has always known how to care for us. We just forgot to listen. So we began adding these things into our routine, sprinkling sesame oil on toast, stirring blueberries into yogurt, steeping green tea after dinner. No rituals, no grand promises, just food, patience, and faith in small things. One evening, Mom looked up from her crossword puzzle, yes, crossword puzzle, and said, "Did you know the brain needs good fat to think?" I blinked. "Where'd you learn that?" She tapped her temple. "You told me." I laughed through a rush of tears. "Well, you remembered it." She smiled. Of course I did. It struck me then, science wasn't separate from her story. It was part of it, running quietly beneath every teaspoon, every blueberry, every moment of clarity. Harvard might call it neurogenesis. Stanford might say dietary support for cognitive function. But sitting there in our small kitchen, it just felt like love made visible. Love, translated into molecules and meals. That night I wrote in my notebook again. Science gives us the language for what the heart already knows. Care is chemistry. Memory is nourishment. Hope is a daily habit. I closed the book, turned off the light, and listened to the sound of her breathing in the next room. For the first time in years, it was steady, untroubled, rhythmic. Like her mind had found a way home, one cell at a time. Mornings used to feel like battlefields, rushing to remember what was forgotten overnight, counting pills, explaining the same things again and again. But over time, the sharp edges softened. Our days started to find their own rhythm, like a song that had always been there but had been playing under the noise. It began with small rituals. Every morning before the kettle boiled, I'd pour a teaspoon of black sesame oil into a tiny glass bowl. Mom would come into the kitchen, wrapped in her robe, hair still wild from sleep. She'd smile that half-awake smile and say, "Is it breakfast time already?" "Almost," I'd say. "You know what comes first." She'd nod, that same calm nod that once told me to eat my vegetables or wear a coat in winter. She'd lift the spoon, take the oil, and chase it with warm water and a bit of lemon. "Earthy," she'd say every time, wrinkling her nose, then laughing. "Like dirt with ambition." That became our inside joke. Dirt with ambition, the kind of dirt that grows things. After breakfast, we started walking. At first, just to the mailbox and back, then to the corner, then around the block. The first few mornings, I walked behind her, nervous, ready to catch her if she stumbled or forgot the way home. But she didn't. She stopped often, yes, and to watch a bird, to touch a leaf, to point out a house she thought looked happy. But she was present, more than she'd been in months. "Do you smell that?" she said one morning. "Lilacs, just like the ones behind Grandma's house." The air was thick with them, and for a second I swear I saw her as a girl again, light in her face, eyes reflecting the same shade of spring. Evenings changed too. No more late-night confusion. No more wandering down dark hallways. Instead, she'd sit on the couch with her blanket and her tea, chamomile with honey, and we'd talk about ordinary things. The weather, Lily's school, what to plant in the garden. "I think we should try lavender this year," she said one night. "It keeps the bees happy." That small sentence, planning, choosing, remembering the details, felt like gold. So we did. We planted lavender and basil and a small patch of mint. Every morning she'd water them, humming softly to herself. Some days she forgot the hose was already on. Other days she remembered every plant by name. But she kept at it. It wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about rhythm. We made other changes too, simple ones, but they mattered. Less sugar, more whole foods, a bedtime at the same hour each night. I replaced her afternoon coffee with green tea and her late-night cookie with a handful of walnuts and blueberries. I started playing soft instrumental music after dinner, the kind that filled the house without demanding attention. And I noticed something. She became gentler, with herself, with me. When she forgot something, she no longer panicked. She'd laugh instead. "Oh well," she'd say. "It'll come back when it wants to." And sometimes it did. One afternoon, Lily came home from school with a jar of marbles for a science project. She spilled them all over the kitchen floor. We both froze. The noise was sudden, sharp, chaotic. But Mom just stood there for a moment, then knelt down slowly and began picking them up one by one. As she did, she said, "You know, we used to play marbles on the sidewalk after school. I could shoot the green ones clear across the yard." I stared at her. "You remember that?" She nodded. "Of course. My brother hated losing to me." Her laugh filled the room, soft and full, and when she handed the last marble to Lily, she said, "You'll have to teach me how your game works now." It was such a small thing, but that afternoon the house felt lighter, as if memory itself had exhaled. At night she began praying again. Not long, elaborate prayers, just quiet sentences said with her eyes closed. "Thank you for another day," she'd whisper. "Thank you for what I still remember." One night, I asked her what she meant by that. She smiled. "I used to be afraid of forgetting everything. But maybe the trick isn't remembering it all, maybe it's loving what's left." That sentence stayed with me for days. By late summer, she could recite her morning routine without help. Wake up, oil, oatmeal, walk, water the garden, pray. I'd listen from the hallway, smiling through tears as she spoke it out loud like poetry. Even her handwriting steadied. She started keeping a small notebook, her memory journal, she called it. Each night, she'd write one thing she wanted to remember from the day. Sometimes it was simple: bluebird on the fence, Lily's laugh, the smell of toast. Other times it was profound: "I felt like myself again today." Those words, in her handwriting, became my treasure. I realized, watching her move through these days, that the healing wasn't only hers, it was mine too. I stopped chasing a cure and started learning to live inside the process. I began taking the sesame oil with her. I ate what she ate, slept when she slept, walked beside her instead of ahead of her. It wasn't about saving her anymore. It was about being with her. And in that togetherness, something shifted in both of us. The world grew slower, softer, our laughter louder, our mornings calmer. "The sum of small choices makes all the difference," I wrote in my notebook one night. And when I turned off the light, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of time, not of forgetting, not of the future. Because whatever came next, we'd meet it together, spoon by spoon, step by step, sunrise by sunrise. It was late autumn when it happened. The air had turned crisp, and the maple tree in our front yard was on fire with color, every leaf aflame against the gray sky. Mom loved that tree. She used to say it looked like it was celebrating its own aging. That morning, I found her sitting on the porch wrapped in her lavender shawl, a cup of tea cupped in her hands. The steam curled up and disappeared into the air. She looked peaceful, not the restless kind of calm that comes after confusion, but a grounded, quiet kind of peace that made me stop and breathe before speaking. "Cold out here," I said softly. She smiled. "I like the cold. It wakes me up." Her eyes were clear, clearer than I'd seen them in a long time. They followed the birds at the feeder, then turned to me, studying my face like a painter trying to remember a portrait. "Do you know," she said, "I used to bring you out here in the mornings when you were a baby, wrapped you in a blanket, fed you warm milk. You'd fall asleep before the sun came up." I froze. I hadn't thought about that in years. It wasn't something she'd ever mentioned since the forgetting began. "You remember that?" I asked, my voice barely holding steady. She nodded, a small smile playing at the edge of her lips. "It came to me in a dream last night. You were so small, always reaching for the light." The days leading up to that moment had been steady. She'd been remembering more, songs, faces, even old recipes. But I'd learned not to expect too much, not to hang my heart on a single thread. Because memory with her was like the tide. It came and went on its own terms. That morning felt different, though. The air itself seemed to hum with something alive. She looked down at her cup, then back up at me, squinting slightly. "You've grown into such a beautiful woman," she said. "Strong like your father." I laughed softly. "He'd like to hear you say that." She tilted her head. "He always said you were the brave one." Then she paused. Her hand trembled slightly, but her gaze didn't waver. Her lips parted and she whispered my name, my full name, slowly, like tasting each syllable. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. She said it again, firmer this time, her voice trembling but sure. "You're my daughter." My sweet girl. It had been almost a year since she'd said my name with certainty. A year of sweetheart, darling, the girl, my sunshine. All of those names were beautiful in their own way. Soft, loving. But this was recognition. I felt tears burn my eyes before I could stop them. "Yes, Mom," I whispered, kneeling beside her. "It's me." She reached out, her hand brushing my cheek. "Of course it's you. I knew it. You were always here." And then, as if afraid she might lose the thought again, she pulled me close. "I found you again," she murmured into my hair. "I thought I'd lost you, but I found you." I don't know how long we stayed like that. Mother and daughter, hearts pressed together, time suspended between what was and what still could be. When she finally leaned back, her eyes were glistening. "It's strange," she said. "I still forget things. I still lose words. But I don't feel lost anymore." I held her hand, tracing the faint blue veins beneath her skin. "You're not lost, Mom. You just took the scenic route." She laughed, that soft, knowing laugh that had once filled my entire childhood. "I like that," she said. "The scenic route. Maybe that's where all the best memories hide." That evening, we made dinner together. Something we hadn't done in years. She chopped vegetables carefully, humming to herself. When she added the black sesame oil to the pan, she winked at me. "The magic potion," she said, grinning. We ate at the table with the window open, the smell of rain drifting in. Lily told stories about school, and Mom listened, really listened, laughing in all the right places, nodding in rhythm with the conversation. At one point, she looked around the table and said, "This feels like home again." It wasn't a grand declaration. It was quiet, sincere, but it carried the weight of everything we'd fought for. Later that night, after she'd gone to bed, I stood at her doorway for a long time. The lamplight spilled across her face, soft and warm. She looked peaceful, present. I thought about all the months behind us, the tears, the fear, the exhaustion. And now, this fragile, glowing moment of return. I realized then that memory isn't something we lose all at once. It slips away in fragments, yes, but sometimes it drifts back in the same way. Small, tender pieces carried on the breeze of routine and love. She'd said my name again. Maybe tomorrow she'd forget it. But tonight, she knew me. And that was enough. Before going to bed, I opened my notebook one last time. The same notebook that had chronicled every small change, every fragile victory. Day 180, she said my name. She looked at me and saw her daughter again. It's not about curing her. It's about finding her, again and again, every time she drifts away. I closed the notebook and whispered a quiet thank you to the woman in the grocery store, to the black sesame oil, to science, to love, to time for giving us this small grace. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, scattering the red and gold leaves across the lawn. Tomorrow, they'd fall again. But tonight, they danced. If you've ever watched someone you love fade into that quiet fog, you know what it feels like. The helplessness, the ache, the longing for one more clear conversation. I can't promise miracles, but I've learned this. Hope doesn't always arrive in big ways. Sometimes it hides in the smallest acts. A teaspoon, a walk, a laugh, a prayer, a memory returning like a bird to its nest. So if you're walking through this too, don't give up. Keep nourishing. Keep believing in small things, because sometimes the smallest things bring someone back home.